This is From Rubble to Roots, a podcast from the Center for Jewish History brought to you with support from Ancestry. This series explores Holocaust survivor stories set against the backdrop of the history that shaped, shattered, and reshaped their lives. I'm your host, Mary Malka Frankel, and in today's episode, I had the very special honor of speaking with Holocaust survivor Ernie Broad, who escaped from Vienna as a young child and went on to rebuild his life time and again in the face of constant loss and tragedy. Though he lived through the war, he did so as an infant, with no memories to connect him to the history he survived. The forces that shaped his early life were never fully explained to him. He had to work to seek them out on his own, tracing a winding, often fragile path toward understanding, and slowly assembling a past he could not remember. In honor of that journey, we invite you, the listener, to experience this episode in a similar spirit of discovery. Rather than offering my usual historical interjections, I'll be stepping back. If a moment sparks a question or curiosity, we encourage you to follow it down whatever path it leads, seeking out answers in your own way, just as Ernie spent much of his life doing. Now, if research isn't your forte and you'd prefer more context along the way, you're welcome to still revisit our earlier episodes, where we explore many of the historical moments and explain many of the historical terms that Ernie mentions in greater depth. It has been a privilege to help bring his story to listeners, and I am deeply grateful to Ernie for coming to the Center for Jewish History and sharing his experiences with such honesty and generosity. Without further ado, we invite you to listen to Ernie's story.
My name is Ernst Broad. In America, my mother renamed me Ernest, but I've always preferred simply to go by Ernie. I was born in Vienna in April 1938, only 3 weeks after the Nazis marched in during the Anschluss. My brother Manfred was 4.5 years old. My mother struggled through a difficult childbirth, unaware that an even more perilous chapter of our lives was about to begin. Within the first 2 weeks of the Nazis' arrival, my father, my grandfather, and my grandfather's brothers were all arrested. My family ran a successful movie business, which made them a target. The Nazis seized the company on trumped-up charges, tax fraud, I believe, and arrested all the men involved. Earlier, my grandfather had urged my father to join the family business rather than pursue his academic ambitions, thinking it would help him better provide for my mother. My father never wanted this life. He was a man of learning, not of business. But the family depended on him, so he agreed. Yet within weeks of my birth, all the men in the business were imprisoned, and my father's decision to abandon his dreams brought none of the security he had hoped for. My father would send letters from jail to home, and at first they spoke of ordinary topics, almost mundane. Please come see me soon. Bring another toothbrush. Bring pajamas. Tell me about the baby. He wrote as if things could still be normal. He seemed hopeful. He believed he would get out because he knew that his father-in-law and uncles had managed to get out. He assumed he would be freed too. But he didn't know the older generation had advantages he didn't. They were street smart in ways my father wasn't. They knew how to negotiate, how to use money, how to maneuver in a world suddenly run by monsters. My father didn't know how to do that, so he remained in prison. As time went on, the letters changed and became darker, which made sense given his environment and the emotional weight of his imprisonment, but it still concerned my mother. The letters, dark as they were, gave her some connection to my father, so they were cherished, just as the earlier letters had been. Eventually, even the depressing letters ceased, and she stopped receiving any contact from my father. My mother, terrified, went to the prison herself to ask about him. The Nazis told her he wasn't there. That itself was ominous. A few days later, a circular arrived in the mail from a local florist. It said in German, strew his grave with flowers. That's how she learned my father was dead. An official death certificate followed, listing the cause of death as suicide. We know now that the Nazis often used suicide as a convenient explanation for murder. Sometimes it was true, but often it was just a lie. We'll never really know what happened to my father. The few clues we have, the letters, the timing, the reports from the prison, allow us only to imagine the terror, the hopelessness, the isolation he must have felt. It is painful to have never known my father and have no memories of him. What I know comes from letters he wrote from prison and from the accounts of others. But I often wonder what our relationship would have been like had he survived. My mother, facing the impossible task of surviving in Vienna as a single mother with two young children, realized the danger was too great. She heard about the Kindertransport and made the agonizing decision to send my brother Manfred to England at age 4.5. She and I remained in Vienna, trying to survive amid the chaos. For more than a year, my mother somehow managed. Then the Nazis began rounding up Jews. She and I were placed in an encampment in a building that had once been a Jewish school, but of course was now closed for business. Many Jews who, like us, were held in this building had applied for visas to the United States. My mother's and my applications were numbers 11,988 and 11,989, which shows just how many people were trying to leave Vienna compared with the very few who were actually allowed to depart and the even fewer who were permitted to enter the United States. There was a rule in this holding area. If a Jew could show a reasonable likelihood of being able to leave Vienna, they could be released from the encampment to pursue that opportunity. If not, they would be sent to work camps. Because of our visa applications, my mother fit the requirements for release and had a theoretical right to leave. I say theoretical, as it was in practice entirely up to the guards. They could delay release, decide arbitrarily who could leave and who had to stay, or, as in our case, ignore the paperwork and resist letting us go. The Nazis didn't account for was that I was a colicky, sickly infant, coughing, sneezing, and wailing with the kind of terrible noises only a baby can make. The guard finally lost his patience. He barked at my mother, "Get him out of here. Go. Take him to a doctor." My mother didn't hesitate. She scooped me up and instead of going to a doctor, went straight to the American consulate. That was the moment our escape began. America was an isolationist and heavily anti Semitic country at the time, with a harsh quota system that allowed only small numbers of Jews to enter. Countries in Western Europe, such as the UK, France, Holland, Scandinavia, had larger quotas. But for countries with large Jewish populations, entry was extremely limited. To receive an affidavit, an immigrant needed an American citizen to guarantee the immigrant's livelihood, proving they had enough money to support them so they would not become a financial burden. Our savior came through family. My father was the youngest of many children, perhaps 10 or 11. One of his much older sisters had emigrated many years earlier to Brooklyn, New York, to Brighton Beach, where she married, raised a family, and later passed away. By 1940, 1941, her widower was living alone. My mother's older sister, who had left Vienna a year earlier, knew of this distant relative. She got to know him and persuaded him to serve as the American guarantor for my mother and me. It was not easy. There was a great deal of paperwork and red tape, but he eventually agreed. Part of the incentive, she joked, was her telling him that the woman he would be helping was young and attractive. Who knows, she teased, what might happen if things worked out. And so, this man, my mother's brother in law, and therefore my uncle, became the guarantor who signed the papers that allowed us to escape the Nazis and leave Vienna. We traveled with difficulty across Europe. I still have our passports from that era showing the journey. Departing Vienna after paying a hefty exit tax, entering and leaving France and Spain, and arriving in neutral Portugal. From Lisbon, we boarded a ship called the Serpa Pinto, famous for ferrying thousands of refugees across the dangerous Atlantic where Nazi U boats patrolled. We arrived at Ellis Island just 3 weeks before my third birthday. As with the part of my testimony about my father, everything I've just shared was either told to me or reconstructed through research, as I have no memory of my time in Vienna. And truthfully, I'm not sorry for that. For a child, forgetting such misery is a mercy. What surprises me is that I don't even remember arriving at Ellis Island. No moment of stepping off the ship, no glimpse of the Statue of Liberty. You'd think that moment or the moments just before would leave some kind of mark. I'm a survivor, yet in that way I sometimes feel like a secondary witness to my own story, present in history, but without the memories of the moment my new life began or the moments that might have ended it. My first memory is my third birthday party in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, in a one-bedroom apartment surrounded by family, my aunt and uncle, my cousins, and my American uncle and guarantor, Hyman Rothenberg. A few months later, my aunt's joke of who knows what might happen happened. My mother and her brother in law got married. So at 3.5, I acquired a stepfather who was also my uncle. Trying to switch from German to English and fit in with the neighborhood was challenging. One day a kid asked me, "Why do you call your father uncle?" I went home and asked my mother. She said, "Call him Dad." And I did, for the rest of our lives together. He was a strict man, and I had to learn how to navigate our relationship. The playful tricks I could get away with my mother didn't work with him, and that taught me the important lesson of how to speak differently to different people. We had a good relationship in its own way. He could be intimidating at times, but I knew he cared, even if he never said it. Occasionally, neighbors would tell me, "Your father said you did this or that," and I realized he was paying attention and was proud of me. My mother was the unwavering center of my childhood. She had learned English in Vienna and spoke it perfectly, though with a heavy accent. Highly intelligent and well read, she had a sharp mind and a love for puzzles. Crosswords were her specialty. She had endured unimaginable loss and upheaval, going from a wealthy girl in Vienna surrounded by maids and governesses to a housewife in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn, cooking all our meals and washing clothes by hand. She was always there when I came home for lunch during school days. And even on the rare occasions she had to be away for family obligations, her presence was still felt. Early on, I learned not to ask her about my father. When I first did, she teared up, and I chose to protect both of us by staying silent. She was my constant, my protector, and the foundation of my life, giving me a sense of love and stability that nothing else could replace. I didn't want to cause her any pain. My mother never said, "I love you," but I felt it in the way she accepted me. No event in my childhood felt complete until I could share it with her. And in that love, everything felt whole. As a family, we observed Orthodox traditions more culturally than strictly religiously. The home was kosher, we celebrated major holidays, and I attended Hebrew school, where I learned to read quickly, but often without comprehension. Holidays were vivid, sometimes tense, but full of lessons. I remember sitting with my stepfather at shul, feeling a rare closeness with him, playing with the fringes of his talis, and taking part in Passover rituals, including reciting the four questions. On two occasions, relatives who were refugees stayed with us in our small Brighton Beach apartment. They slept on the couch, which was disruptive but memorable for me. Both visitors had terrible stories. One had lost an entire family, and the other had a story less intense but still traumatic. My mother and stepfather had to encourage them to jumpstart their lives, find work, secure housing, and move forward. It was an uphill battle. I became more aware of the horrors occurring in Europe that I had no memories of from my time there. While I was growing up in Brooklyn, my brother Manfred was being raised in Manchester, England, by a foster family, having arrived there through the Kindertransport. Jewish organizations helped maintain contact between the biological and foster parents. So my brother's foster family would write to my mother. Their letters said, "We have him, he's fine," and included updates about his life, giving her some reassurance. I also wrote to Manfred, sending him childish letters at first, then better ones, and at one point we began to exchange comic books. It was just another layer of the strange childhood I led. A refugee, a stepfather who was also my uncle, and a brother across the ocean. During the war, it was impossible to bring children across the Atlantic. But even after it became possible in 1945, my stepfather, working unhappily for his older brother in a small shop on the Lower East Side, refused to take on the responsibility of bringing another child into our family, fearing we could not afford it. As a response to this, my mother and her sister, who lived only a half mile away, spent countless hours plotting and scheming to bring Manfred over. I was aware of this all along and ambivalent about it. On one hand, an older brother might be fun. On the other hand, I was content as an only child. By 1947, Manfred was about to turn 13 and have his bar mitzvah. My mother had saved just enough money to travel to England for the ceremony, hoping to finally bring him back with her. There are pictures of her at the bar mitzvah, encountering a sullen 13-year-old who barely remembered her from when he was 4. He was at the time attached to the life he knew, his foster parents, friends, school, and home. He refused to come to the United States and reunite as a family. So my mother returned home without him. Throughout my childhood, my mother often talked about how I would go to Columbia and become a lawyer. Where she got that idea, I don't know. She was an educated woman, very aware of the world and what it demanded. She communicated her plan not so subtly. Neighbors would visit, pat me on the head, and comment, "Wow, what a mouth in that kid. He should be a lawyer." And my mother would say, "Yes, he's going to be a lawyer, but first he's going to Columbia." I heard this as a 7, 8, 9 year old and thought, what? Over the years, her voice stayed in my head, and I attended Columbia College. When it came to law school, I made a deal with her. I would go to law school only if I could get into a top program. My greatest involvement during my undergraduate years was with the Columbia Spectator, where I became sports editor, and with the campus radio station, where I provided live play-by-play descriptions of Columbia games. When law school applications drew near, I tried to game the system, assigned myself to cover a Columbia event so I'd be late for the law school aptitude test, but it didn't matter. I did very well, and ended up at Columbia Law School, which I did not enjoy, but fulfilled my mother's dream for me. In my middle year at law school, my mother was diagnosed with terminal cancer. Somewhat to my surprise, my brother decided to come see her. I was 21 when I met him for the first time, and it was as strange a meeting as you could imagine. He knocked on our door in Brighton Beach, Brooklyn. My mother was hospitalized. My stepfather and I were at home. In he walked. There he was. The first thing I noticed, because I'm competitive, was that he was shorter than me. I reached out in an American half hug, and he, like a proper Englishman, stuck out his hand. We met awkwardly in the middle. He stayed for a week during a very difficult time. Shortly after, my mother passed away. Later, he wrote to tell me that a woman he had been seeing, whom my mother and I had met when she studied in America, was going to marry him, and he hoped I would attend. In 1960, I boarded a propeller plane and, after a rather bumpy journey, had a wonderful time at their wedding. While Manfred and his wife went on their honeymoon, I stayed in Europe, touring and living on $5 a day. When they returned, I stayed with them, and we got to know each other better. Because we both worked for international companies, there were many opportunities for visits on one side of the Atlantic or the other. Over the years, we have seen each other often, probably more than some brothers in the same city. And our families share vacations and celebrations. We have become remarkably close, despite having missed a childhood together and living apart. This past November, Manfred turned 90. We celebrated in London, near Liverpool Street Station, the very station where Kindertransport children arrived. A sculpture there commemorates it, and I treasure a photo of us standing in front of it. At the luncheon, I toasted the miracles that allowed two Jewish children from Vienna, born in 1934 and 1938, to be alive and together. Back to the proper timeline. Right after I returned from Manfred's wedding, I met Carol, an 18-year-old philosophy student living next door to a small cottage my mother had purchased. We married in 1962. Though I was 24, she was far more mature than I was, wise, caring, and deeply attuned to others. She went on to earn a second master's in social work and became a prominent psychoanalyst, teaching and serving as a dean at a psychoanalytic training institute. She had an extraordinary gift for understanding people, making them feel cared for and supported. The world of philosophy didn't do her justice. The world of therapy did. Together, we had three wonderful children: Jacqueline, who now goes by Joanna, Mara, and my son, John. As a father, I love them all so much and have made an effort to, unlike my own mother and stepfather, verbalize those emotions and tell them, not just show them, how much they truly mean to me. Tragically, Carol was diagnosed with brain cancer and passed away in 2000, just 4 months after her diagnosis. Her intelligence, compassion, and warmth left a lasting mark on me, and I'm sure all those around her. A few years later, both my son and I tried J-Date, and each of us met a wonderful woman. He married his, and I married mine. I like to think it's a little unusual, and maybe even a bit funny, that both of us found love the same way, but it's been such a blessing. I've often thought that if J-Date ever wanted a poster family, we'd probably fit the bill. My second wife, Ruthie, is a true blessing in my life. Together, we've built a blended family with 6 children embracing their new step parents and 8 grandchildren who all call me Pop-Up. We love each other deeply and recently celebrated our 20th wedding anniversary. Ruthie has a wonderful sense of humor, often calling me the Energizer Bunny because I stay so busy. A second marriage and a blended family come with challenges, but we face them together, supporting and caring for one another. And I can honestly say our life together has been a source of great joy and strength. During the years with Carol and Ruthie, my career went through many shifts, both for better and worse. Early on, business law was foreign to me, and for a Jewish graduate, opportunities were limited. Many Wall Street firms didn't accept Jews, and even the so called Jewish firms only took the top students. I found my way to government law, working at the Federal Trade Commission on some notable cases, including one that reached the Supreme Court. Later, I joined Western Union International, eventually becoming general counsel. I didn't enjoy the legal work and gradually shifted into business and administration. Eventually, a friend introduced me to a corporate investigations firm. I was skeptical, but it turned out to be a perfect fit. Investigating companies and people had a bit of a journalistic feel, and I even developed the skill in bringing in business. I stayed with that company, a leader in the field, for 17 years. After several years with Deloitte and another firm, I was starting to gear up for retirement when a larger company offered me a position I couldn't refuse. I stayed there for 11 years, gaining the reputation of a luminary in this business. 3 years ago, I started Broad Global Intelligence, BGI, a New York based investigations and intelligence firm providing services such as investigative due diligence, asset tracing, and fraud investigations. The company was eventually absorbed by a larger firm, for which I now serve as deputy chairman, continuing to be involved in the work I've spent more than 40 years building. I spend 2/3 of my time with the business and the rest telling my story. By the way, this marks the 50th time I've told my story in the 2.5 years since I came out of the closet as a survivor. Before then, I had never spoken a word in public about my story. I also want to add that I've returned to Vienna several times to see my aunt and uncle who moved back there after the war. I did not enjoy being there. It was as if I could feel the traces of anti Semitism in the air and in the streets. On one visit, family took me to tour a castle in the suburbs. It was late afternoon, and when we arrived, the castle was closed. I spoke German with them as best I could and almost instinctively made a pun. Das Schloss ist geschlossen, playing on Schloss, the word for castle, and schließen, to close. My aunt suddenly started to cry, and I was confused. She explained that this was exactly the kind of pun my father would have made. In that instant, I felt a rare connection to the father I had never known. His humor, his personality, the way we saw the world, all lost to me as a baby, came alive for just a moment, linking the past I had missed with the life I'm living. The last words I remember from my mother were, "Keep your head high." I've tried to live by that ever since, and I believe I have. I've built a life I'm proud of. I married two wonderful women, raised a family, and forged a deep bond with a brother I met only later in life. I built a career in which I am respected. I only wish my parents could have seen the life they helped make possible. I think they would be proud. My name is Ernie Broad, and I'm proud to be a Holocaust survivor. This was my story. Thank you for listening.
You've been listening to From Rubble to Roots, a podcast by the Center for Jewish History brought to you with support from Ancestry. We thank Ernie Broad for sharing his story, a legacy of reunification, perseverance, and the quiet strength that echoes through generations. It's been a real honor to work with him on this episode, and we thank him for his time. Every family has a story. If you or someone you know is a survivor or a child of a survivor and would like to share that story with us, we invite you to be a part of this living archive. To learn more or to record an episode, email gi@cjh.org. Again, that's gi@cjh.org. I'm Maria Malka Frankel. Thank you for listening and for helping carry these stories forward.